And welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is the brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We've been here for 7 seasons, and of course, here to talk all about your Missouri basketball Tigers. I am your host, Sam Snelling. If you're watching us on YouTube, you will see me to your left. Please take a moment to hit the like button below. If you have not already, you can also press subscribe, and then you'll get alerts when all these little videos come out. To my right is not the Matt that you are accustomed to seeing, but one that we've seen here frequently at Data Mizzou, Matthew Watkins from just down the road in Glendale. Matt, how are you?
Doing all right. How are you?
I am doing just fine. We are recording this Monday evening on November 20th, and everything's great. I mean, Mizzou football Tigers, 9-2, chance to get to 10 regular season wins, something that doesn't happen a lot for SEC programs not named Alabama or Georgia. So that's kind of cool. I don't know. Not a lot else is going on, at least not that I'm aware of.
Nothing happened.
I didn't watch a basketball game last night. I did watch one a few nights ago that was mildly interesting for about 11 and a half minutes. Kidding a bit here, because if you were not paying attention to any of the Mizzou results over the weekend, you may have missed that the Missouri Tigers came back home for a bye game against the Jackson State Tigers and promptly lost on a not a buzzer beater, but like they pretty much held the lead the entire second half, and Jackson State tossed one in with about 8 seconds or so to go, and Mizzou could not get a shot off in the remaining seconds there. So Watkins, I'm going to throw this banner up here because I think it speaks for itself. That was bad. It was a catastrophe. This is the first, what I would consider like really, really bad moment for Dennis Gates and his short tenure at Missouri. Konza Martin had Charleston Southern. Kim Anderson had several of these kinds of games. But losing to a SWAC school on your home floor, I know that there were several Pac-12 schools that went to SWAC schools. What was that, last year, 2 years ago?
It was last year.
Yeah, and I think a couple of them took some L's. It's a good way to, just have an anchor on your NCAA tournament resume. And you're going to have to really get ahead of the game because of an early season loss in front of a smattering of fans during Thanksgiving week. What are your thoughts?
There's bad losses, and then there's bad losses. There's 2 types of bad losses, in my opinion. Like last year, Mizzou had multiple bad losses. What happened down at Auburn, that was a bad loss. They were completely non-competitive. They were down by 30 in the first half. Kansas was a bad loss. I mean, it wasn't losing to either of those teams is not bad in of itself. Same thing with Princeton in the NCAA tournament. That's kind of a bad loss. But those teams are quality teams, varying degrees, and a loss to them isn't bad necessarily, but the manner in which it happened is bad.
Right.
But yesterday, there's just no redeeming qualities of it. A loss, no matter how bad to that team, is going to be incredibly harmful to your resume, first of all, but to the excitement around the program. I mean, Memphis, we saw a sold out stadium. The other games haven't been that highly attended, but I think at least outside of yesterday, we've seen more people at Mizzou Arena than we've become accustomed to seeing over the years in these non-con bye game situations. So, you've got a relatively new team. You've got some seniors on the team and older players who've transferred in, but new together. So it's just it's a bad foot to get off of for a lot of reasons. And there's a lot of reasons it happened, but it's just, it's bad. I mean, it's, I try to keep a pretty level head, low tone, but man, that's one you're going to remember.
Yeah. And I think we have at least something of a reputation of sort of being non-reactionary at Rock'em Nation. I think that goes all the way back to, previous, not ownership, but, previous site leaders, Bill Connolly, notoriously even-handed, especially when it comes to his Mizzou sports fandom. And I think, part of it, when you are, a passionate fan, but, you also enjoy just sort of like college sports in general, you have a little level of understanding of like, oh, you know what, like shit happens, right? Sometimes shit happens good for you. Sometimes it doesn't, and you look at, like Missouri football is a good example this year. Very fortunate, to win some of the games that they did. 4th and 17 is not something that you see converted very often. And they did. And if they don't get 4th and 17, they don't beat Florida. Conversely, I think if you look back, and even if you look back at like some of like our recent posts and discussions of, sort of like what Mizzou is and what you can expect, like Matt Harris talking right before the season started about luck and close games. And, then you see like the Minnesota game happen and this wild comeback. It's capped off by Shawnee's converting a 3-point play to take a 2-point lead with hardly any time. Missouri barely led in the ball game, if at all, prior to that. And you almost start to kind of think, all right, like maybe there's just something that, something Dennis Gates does with his guys that gives them, the right mindset late in games. And I'm not going to say that that's not the case, but they certainly left some ugly marks in the bed against Jackson State. And that was down the stretch when, in a game that, even though like I thought Jackson State played harder, I thought they were more aggressive, I thought they were getting to loose balls. I thought they were just playing harder than Missouri was. They were executing their game plan better than Missouri was. They were clearly a less talented team. And that because Missouri was playing poorly and they were still winning. At some point, I think they had like an 8 or 9 point lead. And then down the stretch, they've done something that we haven't seen Dennis Gates teams do, and they just didn't execute. Yeah. They didn't execute simple things like making your free throws. They didn't execute, valuing the basketball. Like one of the things that I wrote about, and I want to say it was back in the spring, talking about the late game luck, is I talked about their turnover rate and how it basically reduces itself to 0 in the last 5 minutes of these close games. And here we are against Jackson State, and they had multiple turnovers. They foul a guy in a 3-point play. I mean, you could just stack the number of mistakes in the last 4 or 5 minutes of that game on top of each other. And it all amounts to giving a team that was desperate enough to, desperate and daring enough to stay with you and keep making plays. And sure enough, they made the last play.
Yeah, I think you brought up a couple interesting points there. One, the energy. I as someone who's not in the locker room or on the team, I hesitate to ever say someone's not playing hard or they're not playing as hard as the opponent. But 2 games in a row now, we've heard Dennis Gates himself say that. He said it last night that Jackson State was more aggressive. They wanted it more, and they were, I forget his exact wording, but said they won every 50-50 ball, which is code words for saying our guys weren't hustling. And then in the Minnesota game, I don't really adhere to this theory, but he said it, that Caleb Grill getting ejected gave them a boost in energy to go proceed on to the rest of the game. Now, that lagged about 6-8 minutes from when that happened to when they actually started playing, and I would not recommend losing one of your starter or starter minute guys and giving free points at the free throw line away in the process. But the fact that he mentioned it makes me think that there's something there, that he's not really impressed, I guess, with the way his team is performing in terms of giving maximum energy. And there's a whole lot of other reasons we can talk about that for as well, as far as the rotation goes. But it just seems like he's not getting what he's wanting out of his team. And there's been a lot of secondary effects from that the team is seeing now. But to me, it was like, this game it's ugly. Mizzou really shouldn't win this, but they're going to win it. And I believe it was with 2 minutes left, just under 2 minutes left. Mizzou was defending and a ball was thrown out into the Jackson State bench. It looked, at least I was watching on my phone for reasons I'm told, that it looked like it probably may have went off of a Jackson State player. And in that situation,
I thought there was enough visual evidence on the replays that we saw that it would have gone the other way.
Right. But here we are under 2 minutes. And anyone who watches college basketball in 2023 knows that any close call everyone is, let's review it. Not a single person on the Mizzou bench had any interest in reviewing that. Why? I'm not saying that they should have or they shouldn't have, but that's highly.
Well, they should have.
I agree. They should have. I'm just not, we're building a platform here into future discussion on this. But Mizzou was up 6 at that point. Of course, after that happens, Jackson State gets the ball, scores. If Mizzou has the ball up 6 in that situation, that game is probably over. And you're just starting at that point. And then everything after that point just went wrong. Offensively, defensively, they could not do anything correct. And it was just a disaster from that point forward. And I went back to that thinking, I was like, why would you not review that? And it kind of, I don't know if we want to get into the lineups now, but it, it kind of is another piece in this puzzle. Like, what is going on? What are we watching in these first few games? And, I'm not in the locker room. I don't know, but it just seems like winning the game right now isn't the primary goal of these games. And that's curious to me.
Well, yeah, especially when you sort of take into account how the roster is assembled. This last offseason, you could have gone in a more youthful direction. You could have looked at Nick Honor and Sean East, in the eye and said, look, like, we're interested in making sure that this is built sustainably for the foreseeable future. We want to make sure that we've got 3 young guys coming in that we like a lot. We want to make sure that they're getting exposure and time to operate and time to grow. We have a class coming in behind them that we're very excited about, and we really want to, build this thing up. What we want from you guys is we want leadership. It may be bumpy, and I think you can reasonably sell that, especially considering, sort of selling them on this role of being, like the guys who really were there building the first bricks of what could be, right? Mm-hmm. And like that's the sale. But instead that he goes out and they get Caleb Grill, they get John Tonji, they get Connor Vanover, guys who are very experienced, in college basketball. And if you're bringing in guys, with their last year to play, like the sale for those guys is a chance to play for a high major that's going to play in the NCAA tournament. Like, I don't know any other, I can't imagine any of those guys being like, oh yeah, like I want to go, be a part of a rebuild. Right.
Well, I mean, we saw it with Connor Vanover. He was looking to go pro, and that's why he had to sit out the first 3 games for playing in the Portsmouth Invitational.
Right.
I don't think Connor Vanover is transferring back to a conference that he left previously to do, to not have a significant role, to not be on a competitive team. I mean, he's been in college for 5-6 years now. Like, yeah, that doesn't jive. So I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, so I think like we've got these super seniors now who very much want to be like basically in the same situation that Missouri was in last year, where you're competitive in the league that you're playing and you're an NCAA tournament team, and so this is probably a good way to pivot to the lineups. I don't really know what the plan is. It seems to be a mixture of both trying to like win, but also get young guys experience. But then he makes decisions in substitutions where you're like against Jackson State, both Tanji and Vanover barely played. And I understand like we've all seen John Tanji, and I don't know about how you feel about it. I know how I feel about it, and I don't know that he's 100% right. He looks well enough to play, but he doesn't look like he has quite the same explosiveness or athleticism that he had last year. Is that related to his whatever lower body, foot, ankle, whatever he was dealing with, in the preseason? Yeah, probably. So maybe they're being careful. Okay. You can sell me on that. We've heard no such thing about Connor Vanover, and he played even less. And here's a guy, with a team who's, really kind of beating you up pretty badly on the boards. I qualify that a little bit by saying you should never get beat. You should never play even, which Missouri basically did against the SWAC team. And, they're an athletic SWAC team, but they're a SWAC team and they don't have the size. Like their point guard is smaller than Nick Honor, which is not something you will hear a lot. So like not playing those guys more, and I don't know what's going through Dennis Gates' head, what his staff, what they talk about. But I don't see a coherent, like, searching for what lineups he thinks are going to work come conference time. And I think, like, that's kind of the thing that we're looking to see is who is this team going to rely upon other than Shawnice and Nick Honor, who seem to be the guys who are certainly getting the bulk of the minutes.
Yeah, I would agree. And, there's the caveat that we don't know about John Tanji's health. I'm of the opinion that if he's healthy enough to start, he should be healthy enough to play. And if he's not healthy enough to play, he's not healthy enough to start. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but if the only way to be conservative, in my opinion, is to not play him at all. But Connor Vanover, he had to sit out 3 games. I'm under the assumption that he's been with the team, during this period of time, that you're just missing game time, which, while valuable, wouldn't you then want to get him into game time in these early games against Jackson State, Loyola, even Minnesota for that matter, to get him acclimated for future games? He started, played 4 minutes, I think. I know
he's played 10 minutes total.
Right. And it's one thing if you're not planning on them being a huge focal point of the rotation in a game. I assume, and I could be wrong on this, when you're going into a game against Jackson State, you're assuming you're going to win the game. That's the reasonable assumption of any high major division one basketball coach. Jackson State is not a good basketball team. They're, they may make the NCAA tournament by winning the automatic bid at 10-21 or whatever on the season. They are not a good basketball team when it comes to what Mizzou should be playing. There's a reason you pay them to come play at your arena and you don't go play them anywhere else. They need the money. Mizzou needs the win, and that's how it works. Often, I shouldn't say often, but that doesn't go to plan at times, and that happened last night. But point being, when you're going into this game, you're expecting to win. You start Connor Vanover, John Tonje. If you build a lead, I can get it. Pull those guys out if they're not doing what you want, or you're a little concerned about the health, whatever. But at no point in the game last night was Mizzou ever in a comfortable position to win that game. From start to finish, I don't believe they ever reached a double-digit lead. I think
the
probably
biggest lead was 8. Yeah.
I think analytically, the closest they came to winning that game in the second half is when they were up 6 with 2 minutes left. And the lineups there were curious as well. But, I look back to when they were at Minnesota, and it even goes back to Memphis as well when they were down in the second half. Who did Dennis Gates bring in when they were down? I mean, I know the lineup against Minnesota was Nick Honor, Noah Carter, along with Trent Pierce, Anthony Robinson, and Kurt Lewis. Kurt Lewis had maybe not even played in the previous game. And then 2 freshmen and then two seniors, who I can totally understand that. But is that really the lineup? And it worked, but is that really the lineup you look at going into a game and saying, hey, this is what I think we're going to need to be successful? It worked out that way, and the lineups did not work out last night. And you look at just the timeshares of some of these players, and it's curious to say the least. The freshmen are getting a lot of time. Anthony Robinson, I believe, is pushing 40% of minutes played, which, he's been good. So I really don't have a lot of qualms with that, with the caveat being that arguably your 2 best players are also point guards. So when you're playing him and Sean East, who's leading the team with nearly 80% of minutes played, Nick Honor, 70%, your 3 point guards are basically playing 2 full spots worth of minute shares.
Mm-hmm.
Is that wise? I'm not sure. And then you look at a guy like Trent Pierce, also a freshman, had a lot of accolades. He's performed okay when he's been in, hasn't seen the time. Jordan Butler. I always call him his brother. Jordan Butler.
It's okay. I don't think it would be a Dive Cuts podcast without accidentally calling Jordan Butler Jonathan.
Where is Jonathan Butler playing anyway in the NBA? Is he on an NBA roster?
Last I thought was maybe the Kings.
Okay. Well, I'm sure not a lot of our listeners care. I was just curious. But Jordan Butler's even seen a pretty big increase over what I expected. And a lot of these minutes are coming at the expense of Connor Vanover and John Tonje. And the question is why? For 3 games, Connor Vanover, the explanation was very easily. For the last 2 games, not so much. John Tonje has played in 4 straight games, but he's had his minutes kind of going up and down and not seeing what you quite expect. Is he not healthy? We don't know. So it's just, there's a lot of questions I have. And even yesterday, I think Noah Carter played 20 minutes in yesterday's game, where he played significantly more against Minnesota. And, when you're going down the stretch, wouldn't you want one of your most proven, one of your best players on the floor? I don't know. We didn't see it. Well,
it's just, I would also, bring back, so, this is another thing that I found curious sort of in the moment. And the last 2 games have come down to single possessions where a substitution was possible.
Mm-hmm.
In the game against Minnesota, Dennis Gates did not sub in a superior defensive team. Like I would have thought that you would have wanted a little bit of rim protection, a little bit of athleticism, somebody who could affect shots. And he stuck with his 2 senior guards. There was a smaller lineup on the court with Noah Carter and I believe Tamar Bates, and I don't remember who the fifth guy was off the top of my head, but
I think it might have been Lewis, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, so a smaller lineup, and at the time I'm thinking, wow, like, man, I would really think like subbing in some size, some athleticism would be helpful. Like I would want Tamar Bates, like I would say Sean East, Tamar Bates, maybe Aiden and, somebody big, in the middle to grab a rebound. They got away with it and it was fine. But the whole time as Minnesota's bringing the ball up, I'm thinking like, what is Sean East doing? He's like just running around like half, I don't know, running interference. But then last night he subs Sean East out and brings in Anthony Robinson, and Ant really allowed a more experienced player to dictate the shot that he wanted and didn't force him to turn at all in the backcourt. Didn't really make him take that tough of a shot. And so the whole, again, this kind of goes back to like, I'm not really sure what the philosophy is here. Like, what are we trying to accomplish if you are going to sub in a more athletic, like, defender, like Anthony Robinson maybe would have been better off going in the game against Minnesota. And then but doing it against Jackson, I still I wouldn't want Ant on the ball. And I think like that's another thing is like, you don't you want your best defender on the ball? Like, who do you think is going to take the shot? Well, Minnesota had already kind of run the clock down and let Christie, take the final shot in the possession before, and he's bringing the ball up. Well, like that's perfect for Tamar Bates. Okay. Tamar, go defend him, make him take a tough shot. Again, like they successfully navigated that play, but they gave up an offensive rebound. Fortunately, it bounced a little too far away and the clock expired before Mitchell could get, a shot off. But it just sort of kind of becomes this theme where like, we aren't really sure what Dennis Gates is trying to achieve. Now, only Dennis Gates knows what he's trying to achieve here. And I don't want to like assume that I know more about Dennis Gates' team than he does, but it's weird to watch, especially for, a team that played so seamlessly a year ago, at least offensively. They were always pretty bad defensively. But they always looked like they knew what they were doing, in offensive situations. And I don't know what to think about this team yet. And so like, I think like I jokingly kind of, set up a banner for us to talk about, but it's a worthwhile question at this point is like, are they any good? They've had a start against Memphis that looked good. They had a finish against Minnesota that looked good. They've done what they needed to do against SIUE and Arkansas Pine Bluff. But outside of that, you played horribly in a lot of the competition against the higher majors. And then you basically, toy around and take a loss to a SWAC team. Like, that's not something a good team does.
No, I agree. And it's just at this point, it's an incomplete for me. There's no way to know if they're going to be good or bad because we don't know who they are yet. And that kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier, if the goal last night throughout the entire game was to win that game, I don't know what the strategy was in doing that. Like, I just don't. And that doesn't mean there wasn't one. That doesn't mean I'm wrong or right. It just, I don't know what it was. And, I watch a lot of basketball. Generally speaking, watching games, you can kind of feel what's going on here, what they're trying to do. And, it may be very possible that Dennis Gates is using these games as a trial grounds without, with some care, but with less care for the outcome of the games to build his team for the future. And that's fine. When we get to January or February, we can have an opinion on that. I don't know whether that's going to, I don't know how that'll shake out, but just last night, what we know at this point is it was very confusing, at least to me.
Yeah. I was confused as well, and it's also entirely possible, and I'm sure like anybody who's played sports sort of been in that situation where you just sort of think you're going to win. And really, I would say up until that shot went in at the end, like the whole time I was like, Missouri's playing horribly, but they're going to win. Like that was basically, how I felt.
I think I was up to that point until Honor missed the first free throw.
Yeah.
Then it was like, this might not end well. You gotta get a stop in 2 straight games at the buzzer. That's asking a lot.
So
no matter.
No, but that is valid because, but it is still like at the end of the game when you're like, well, okay, like maybe they won't win this game. But even like as you're watching and as you're being frustrated, you still think they're going to win, right? And so I think like maybe there's a part of the approach where if you think you're going to win, then maybe you are way more trying to think of the right way to say this. You're a lot just more willing to experiment. And that's what it feels like a lot of this early going has been, has just been Gates trying to sort of see what works. I think where the only really real big area that I'm questioning this is he seems to be a lot more willing to experiment with guys who I don't think will be helping him in the middle of February. And maybe there's this element of him, being the psychologist and trying to make sure that everybody is as invested right now so they stay invested later. And I know that everybody is sort of like, I guess, sort of pumping Jesus Carolauer Martin for, how well he played against, Jackson State. But I just can't help but think, like, while he's out on the floor, you're not playing Connor Vanover. You're not playing Aiden Shaw. You're not playing Trent Pierce. You aren't playing these other guys who longer term are probably more likely to be higher impact, for you in an SEC schedule.
Yeah.
So and not to pick on Zeus, because I think he's again, like he was one of the few guys that was doing anything sort of with an effort.
It's true.
Against Jackson State. But it is at least curious to see where who gets a longer leash for one. And certainly he's one of the guys that seems to have a longer leash. And then you see like Tanji and Vanover, and again, not knowing how healthy Tanji is, like you don't want to harp on that a whole lot, but I've seen Connor Vanover play for 10 minutes. I haven't seen him really do anything wrong. He looks like Connor Vanover does.
Mm-hmm.
He's big, like tall.
You're recruited to bring in.
Yeah. I mean, he's not knocking down threes left and right, but we knew he wasn't a great shooter coming in. He has the capability to make those shots, but he's not. Yeah, it's not the most consistent at making them. So, without just kind of harping on this, like, I really feel like, and again, I think even coming in after Minnesota, you were thinking, okay, like here are 3 bye games. It's a chance to kind of get your rotations down, and it cost you a game. Mm-hmm. It cost you a game in a really bad way, and I really wanted to go back and look and find all the number of times like SWAC teams have beaten high majors. But work got a little busy today, and I didn't have time to like find all that. I did see that Grambling, I believe Cartier Gordon was still playing for Grambling last year, if I'm not mistaken. They did beat Vandy at Vandy.
Yeah,
and you know who didn't make the NCAA tournament last year?
Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt. Hey, you think losing a home game to a SWAC team may have cost them, even though they went 11-7 in league play?
Yeah, I would say Vandy had a little. That was a big issue. Vandy had a few more issues in the non-conference than just that. But I mean,
hey, Missouri's trending that way, bud.
No, it's a question mark, and I think last year, just for out of curiosity's sake, I cracked open the old bracketology spreadsheets and scrolled down through, and I think there were 8 at-large teams that dropped a quad 4 game last year, and 3 of them dropped multiple quad 4 games. And then I believe there was one, I think it was USC, but don't quote me on that. But there was one team that lost 2 quad 4 games and a quad 3 game and still earned an at-large bid. Now, that being said, the
bubble is always soft. The bubble is all like, everyone's like, how is this team a bubble team? They have these, like, it's right. Soft every year. Everybody is mediocre.
That said, the time for talking tournament expectations and hope is not after losing to Jackson State. It's after reeling off a series of wins that get you in that conversation, and then you can talk about explaining away Jackson State. We're not at that point yet, and it goes back to, we just don't know who this team is and who's going to make it up, and how much proportion. We feel pretty good that Nick Honor and Noah Carter are going to see a lot of minutes. Sean East is playing more than I expected, probably more than you'd probably hope to see. There's for a team that at least wants to play up tempo and press and whatnot, 80% of minutes is a lot. No one approached that last year, even with a short bench. But that's just another kind of feather in the cap of, what is the idea early in the season? If you're wanting to get Anthony Robinson more involved, and then Sean East is playing 80% of minutes and Noah Carter's playing 70% of minutes, whose minutes are he taking? And why isn't it kind of more of a give and take for a more natural replacement at the point guard position than playing 2 or 3 point guards at the same time? And don't get me wrong, I love point guards, but
we like ball handling,
right? But when you've got young guys out the wazoo at the bigger end of the spectrum, when Jonathan did it again, Jordan Butler and Trent Pierce, and then even Aiden Shaw is still not what I would consider seasoned. You've got those guys wanting minutes. It's I don't know. We'll see as it goes on. It's too early to make any grand proclamations as to these are the guys that are going to be playing. This is in any way indicative of how it's going to be 2 months from now. It's a little perplexing at this point.
Well, so, coming up, there are still 2 more bye games that in theory should be wins. In defense of Dennis Gates and Missouri, there have been a lot of surprise upsets of, mid-major, low majors on the road beating, teams that are expected to be very good. Bryant just beat Florida Atlantic. I know that there's a lot of people that may think Florida Atlantic are a little fraudulent. I don't think they are. I thought they were a really good basketball team. They're still probably going to be in contention to win their league along with Memphis. James Madison went to Michigan State. Michigan State is a, Big Ten contender, and they won that game. And there's been several others. But the main thing is here, I think we're going to see a lot of, and not maybe loads, but a lot of games where mid majors are beating high majors. And when you turn so many rosters over year in and year out, and the continuity is what it is at the high major level, there's likely to be some bumpy nights. And Missouri has run into a few extras. Jackson State is now a top 300 KenPom club. The next two opponents are not. South Carolina State is at 343. Loyola Maryland is at 321. Jackson State, by comparison, 284.
By the way, they're not yet top 300 teams.
What's that?
I said they're not yet top 300 teams. It's amazing how beating a top 75 team does that, right? I don't expect that to happen, but that's how these things happen.
Well, Jackson State did actually start the year.
They were in the low 200s.
Yeah, they were 219. I think they had some really, really bad shooting nights. Particularly against Tulsa, I think they were horrible shooting the ball. But this is not a Jackson State pod. We're talking about South Carolina State, because I wanted to at least give people a little bit of a look into what the Bulldogs from Orangeburg, South Carolina. I would not have guessed that. They're 2-2 with wins over North Florida and Voorhees.
That's
Voorhees,
right?
Yeah. No, Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th. That's
right. Yeah. So Jason Voorhees and his mother. So
couldn't quite pull off the
State. South Carolina State lost to South Florida. South Florida's not very good, by close to 40 points. And then they've just lost to Stanford by 17. So they're not very good. And then they have Loyola of Maryland.
The lowest of the three Loyolas: Loyola Chicago, Loyola Marymount, and there might even be another one. I don't know, but there's a
Loyola in
New Orleans. I don't know if they're D1 or not.
They have a good law school.
I look more at basketball rankings than I do about law school rankings. I don't know where the law school ranks. I was just like, I had a buddy who was like living down there, and he started taking law classes, and he's just like, law school is really good. I was like, okay, I did not know that. But Loyola Maryland is 1-4. Their lone win is over Brown in overtime. They lost to Florida, University of Florida, the Gators. Everybody's favorite, Todd Golden, by 20. They lost to Binghamton by 6. They lost by 15 to Sacred Heart, and UMBC by 15. Okay.
So we are in an area where, like, these are two games that Missouri should win, but by how much? And one of the things that we were kind of talking about in our Slack chat is at some point Missouri needs to start making up ground, and they need to run up the score. Like, beating one of these teams by 50 would be a great thing for them analytically. When you consider the fact that they started the season, 55th, and now they're 85th. And then, because after next week, like, the road doesn't get easier. So you're on the road at Pittsburgh, you're at home against Wichita, then you go to Kansas, then you have Seton Hall in Kansas City, and you have Illinois, and then you get Central Arkansas to wrap the non-con up. Pittsburgh's currently 40th. Wichita State's in the top 100 at 98. Kansas is 4th. Seton Hall's 52. Illinois is 28. the only game that they're projected to win out of that group is Wichita State. And that's because it's a home game. So they need to get right pretty fast. Do I think that Missouri can beat Pittsburgh and can beat Seton Hall and can beat Illinois? Yeah, I do, because I think the talent's there on the roster. I just don't think they're playing very well yet. But they've got a week to figure it out with South Carolina State, Loyola, before that stretch starts. What are we hoping to see over the next week?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The thing that I want to see, first of all, without question, excuse me, you have to prove that Sunday night was an outlier. And the easiest way to do that is to fix the biggest problem that is never a problem for Mizzou, and that's the turnovers. It was just, I've never seen a Dennis Gates team, at least at Mizzou, handle the ball as poorly as they did. It's just, I was having problems watching on my TV. The kids were draining the internet on their shows, so I had to switch over to the phone. But every time it would jump and stop, Mizzou was turning the ball over. I mean, it was nonstop. What did they end up with? 18 turnovers and 71 possessions?
18, yeah. Their point guards combined for 5, which, and if you include Anthony Robinson, 9 total of the 3 point guards.
That's absurd. You can't have that. Mizzou isn't the most talented team in the country. They're not the best defensive team in the country. They're not the best shooting team in the country. What they have is a stable of veteran ball handlers, and they have multiple perimeter players who are experienced and with guys like John Tonje, Tamar Bates, Caleb Grill, that, these are guys that you're relying on to win you games by not losing them. And Mizzou actively lost the game last night. And that's just not something that we've come accustomed to seeing with Dennis Gates teams. I tweeted out this morning that one of the things I track is the points lost via turnover. And it's kind of convoluted, but in essence, how many points did the offense lose by turning the ball over? And that's both in live ball transition buckets for the opponent and points you lose offensively for excess turnovers. And the total of this game, I believe, was the 6th highest since Konza Martin's last year. It was the 2nd highest of the Dennis Gates era, with Kansas last year being slightly higher. A team that was top 5 most of the season. The year prior, Konzo's last year here, there was 4 such instances against Florida State, LSU twice, which was an elite defense, and Arkansas when they lost by, 2,000 down in Fayetteville. It was 30-0 before the game even started. These are the types of ball handling performances that Jackson State forced Mizzou into, and that just boggles my mind how they could be so bad at that. Jackson State wants you to turn the ball over. That's what their game plan is. A, you should know that. B, it's a SWAC team. It shouldn't happen. End of story. So that needs to, that needs to prove to be an outlier, first of all. If that is not an outlier and that is par for the course, start planning for next season. It's, this team can't win when they're hemorrhaging turnovers like they did. Second of all, I want to see a little bit more of an identity of what this team is. We've had a game pushing 80 possessions in the first game of the season, and what was it against SIU? 61, 62. What are we doing? Are we a team that wants to run up and down the court? Are we going to get out and press? The press numbers, the rates of times Mizzou has pressed the opponent has varied widely from game to game. What is our philosophy going to be? If you're playing 11, 12 guys, I would hope it's going to be the up tempo. You're not going to run 10 or 11 guys in when you're scratching to get 60 possessions in a game. That's totally unnecessary. So what are we doing in that respect? Are we going to see more zone defense this year? Dennis Gates and even Florida State to that extent use zone more than most teams, even though it's not their primary defense. Offensively, Matt Harris is probably more apt to speak on this, but are we seeing a complete move away from the point series, the high post, the Princeton concepts, and going to all 5 out? Is it a mesh? Where's the point? Why are we doing one versus the other? Is this just an experiment? And I just want to see what guys are going to be the core of this team, because we just don't know that yet. And, until the lineups get sorted out in a little bit more consistent fashion, I don't know that we will know. But, those are kind of the things that I'm looking for. And then, of course, wins. You can write off one terrible loss as a kind of a fluke. More than one, especially in quick succession, would be bad news.
Yeah. It is one of those that, I do think they're going to win the next 2 games. There's no reason for me to, think that like they're going to play as poorly as they did and be as ill prepared. Maybe it's one of those things where, you come off this emotional win, where you expended a lot of, just going to repeat myself, emotion, to kind of get it all back. And then you come home against a team that you are sure you're going to beat in front of a half, not even half full. Like, it was a pretty light crowd because it's Thanksgiving week. Students are already, heading home. And you basically just don't show up. And I think that if anything, that should be like a good wake up call. To me, it is going to come down a little bit to style points, though. Are you, beating South Carolina State by 10, 12? Or are you beating them by 30? If you're beating them by 30, then I'm like, all right, like, okay, like we still have things to work on, but we're getting back to what we think we can be. But if it's a close game, then, like I'm starting to wonder like where that gear is going to kick in, and if we're going to see it in time before things start to get a lot tougher. So that's all I've got.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the margin would be nice. I guess me personally, I'd rather see, the types of things I was looking for in a 15-point victory than lineups all over the board. And Mizzou has a heater where they shoot 60% from 3-point range and win by 30. I'm not going to be upset with that by any means.
I wouldn't mind if they shot that well. Like, it would be nice to see.
But see, the thing is, they didn't even shoot that poorly last night. I mean, they had a 54.1%.
I think they were like 37 or 38% from 3, and almost like 50-something, 58 or 9 from 2.
Yeah, I mean, they shot the ball well enough. Jackson State didn't shoot the ball too well. Yeah,
Missouri shot the ball better.
But
Jackson State had 5 more possessions if you don't account for turnover, or if you account for turnovers. So 5 extra shots basically.
I mean, typically in an upset like that, you see either a horrendous shooting effort by the home team,
so I mentioned
an outlier shooting performance by the visiting team. That's what happened with Charleston Southern when they came in here. Mizzou couldn't buy a bucket. Charleston Southern got hot, and that's how they lost. But the game last night, that didn't happen. I mean, it was just Mizzou was not being Mizzou.
Yeah, and I think Michigan State, when they lost to James Madison, were like 1 of 20 from 3. Like Missouri shot the ball well enough where you wouldn't think that the game would have been close. If they'd have taken care of the ball, it wouldn't have been close. We're going to get out of here.
Yeah.
I think we're probably going to run, and maybe at the beginning of the pod, the ad for the T-shirt. This T-shirt. And put it up here, just cover us up.
There it is. Yeah.
Hey.
So let's see. We got Memphis on there. Pull that back.
Yeah. So
Memphis,
you want to put it
Knoxville. Back? What is Middle Tennessee State? What is that?
Murfreesboro.
Murfreesboro. That's right. In Nashville.
In Nashville.
There we go.
Murfreesboro. Murfreesboro.
Yeah, whatever. Kermit Davis's last
Murfreesboro, really, guys? Like that's what we went with. Like, was Murphy's? Was it like Murphy and then like Freesburg or something like they were the founders? I'm not going to look it up, but that's a ridiculous name for a town. Yeah, so you can go to the website. I've recorded an ad. I'm sure it's ridiculous. Go get your t-shirt. We're really excited about being able to kind of do stuff like this. We're going to do more, at least if it does well. I don't have numbers on it yet, but go buy your t-shirt and support Mizzou NIL. And so next week we'll see if the other Matt shows up or not. Otherwise, I will be here with somebody recording another podcast and talking about Mizzou basketball. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you everyone for tuning into Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, just click the subscribe button below. And you can find this podcast through the Apple Podcast app or for iPhone, or the Google Podcast app for Android, or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. We are also available on Spotify. Just search for Rock M Radio. And if you like other sports, Fans First Sports Network is a podcast network that has coverage of all other teams, Major League Baseball, MLS, NFL, whatever you want to listen and read about. It is a great network full of really fantastic podcasts. So look them up and subscribe to any and all of those podcasts. Rock M Radio will be back with more episodes coming soon. Thanks.